We've heard a lot about data. Now we're going to see a lot about data. We have Mike Wragg, the Managing Director of APAC for Nielsen, to talk about some sporting numbers. Mike.
There we go. Thanks. Hi, everybody. My name is Mike Wragg, and I'm the Managing Director of Nielsen Sport in Asia Pacific. So Nielsen in Asia Pacific, there's a little more than 4,000 of us spread around the region, and we just focus on three things, really. So the first is that we measure both TV and digital audiences around the region. The second is that we measure a lot of marketing, so advertising, but also sponsorship and also influencer marketing, which is growing like crazy, particularly in this region at the moment. And then the third thing that we do is that we spend a lot of time getting a very, very granular understanding of the outcomes from marketing investments. So specifically within the sports division, which is the one that I lead, we focus on sponsorship, so we do an awful lot of media exposure, analytics. We conduct millions of interviews of fans around the region and around the world every year, and we do that in order to provide for the 1,500 clients that we have a kind of really, really clear understanding of the value of sponsorship. So my topic for today, for the next 10 minutes, is to give you an overview of what has been happening in the broader media world and in the marketing world during 2020 and 21, basically during the time that we have all been working from home, and what has actually been happening out there and how has the world changed. And Nielsen has been doing this kind of stuff since the 1930s. And in all of that time, there has never been a time of such dramatic change over such a short period of time as in the last 2 years. So it's very, very interesting. So to get into it, the first part, so if we think about the global sports economy, then a third of that comes from sponsorship expenditure. So what has been happening to sponsorship investments and indeed overall advertising spend over the last 18 months or so? And if we think about advertising spend, I mean, advertising spend has been basically growing globally for a regular sort of 5% a year for the last 2 decades, something that you could really rely on. Let's have a look at what happened during 2020 and the beginning of this year. So here we can see the growth rates. So the shock to the system that came in the second quarter of 2020 with a really dramatic negative growth situation. I mean, the good news is that you can see that it's coming back to something closer to the growth that we saw before coming into the first quarter of this year. But this is a really extraordinary event. 2 things that really come out of this for me, for the sports industry. I mean, the first obvious thing is that, you know, there's quite a lot of money missing from the overall sport economy, although that is starting to come back. But much, much more interesting than that is that this shock created an opportunity for sponsors to rebase their investment portfolio of sponsorships. So we've seen all over the world brands rethinking how they're going to make those investments. And then that has a consequence in terms of a lot of the things which they were already thinking about and the longer term trends in valuation in sponsorship that we were already anticipating. They've really, really sped up. So that's on the sponsorship side. The second third of the global sports economy is associated with media rights and therefore media behavior. So what has been happening with media behavior whilst we've all been working from home? And This is a pretty interesting chart, slightly busy one. So what we've done here is that we've put together across a really broad selection of markets where Nielsen is the TV audience currency around the world. We've compared the reach of linear TV in the first half of 2019, the first half of 2020, and the first half of 2021. And there are two things that really jump out at me when I'm looking at this chart. The first thing is that if we think across the Asia-Pacific region, is just how much variation there is. So if we look at markets like Malaysia and Taiwan, then the reach of linear TV is still up in the 60s as a percentage of the total population that linear TV is reaching. But for Vietnam or for New Zealand, it's down in the 40s. So there's a huge difference in the starting point. But the second thing that's really clear when you look at this chart is there is a point of inflection where the decline of linear TV really picks up pace. And that point of inflection is in the first half of 2020. And that's really, really significant to the sports industry, because the effect of that is that advertisers are therefore under increased pressure to think about what are the new channels that they need to find in order to address their consumers around the region and across the rest of the world. And that's particularly true for certain demographics, and we're already picking this up in the panel conversation that we just had. So if we look at these markets that we've got here and start to break that down by the age of the audience, then again, this chart shows across all of the markets that we've just seen, the age composition of that TV audience. And the thing that jumps out for me here is the growing gap between the median age of the population and the median age of the TV audience. So in the middle of this chart, we have the US, and in the US, the median age at the moment is 38. But if you look at the numbers on the chart behind me, 70% of the TV audience in the US are over the age of 50. So there's a really big gap opening up. And what's the significance of this in terms of the sport industry? Well, if we look on this next slide, what I've done here is over on the right-hand side, you can see the age composition of the general population, and then compared that to the age composition of all of these famous global sports properties that we're going to be talking about over the rest of today. And broadly speaking, what you can see is that for football and for basketball, they're doing a pretty good job in reflecting the composition of the general population. The motorsports properties are starting to catch up on that and making some good progress. But for esports, you can see it's really significantly over-indexing in that harder and harder to reach demographic. And that is the reason why we are seeing some of our mainstream global clients, like Nestle in this particular example, are now starting to make investments with their Kit Kat brand, in this case, into esports. And we're also seeing many of the newer, younger brands that are coming into the industry, for example, the crypto brands, are starting to focus a lot on esports as well. And I think it's just worth thinking then about the significance of Singapore as part of the global sports industry as well. So we already heard earlier on, we have the Global Esports Federation, which is based here in Singapore. It's very clear how relevant they are, and increasingly relevant they're going to be in the future. But we also have based here in Singapore the largest sports property, the largest global sports property, which is actually based out of Asia, One Championship. And One Championship, as no doubt we will hear later on as we go through the day, has done a fantastic job in outcompeting the other global properties, particularly in the increase in digital engagement over the last 18 months as well. So I want to round out by just talking about 5 key topics which are really, really hot at the moment around the projects that we're being commissioned to look at, and the things which are really growth drivers in the sports industry just right at the moment. I'm going to talk about virtual sport quickly. I'm going to talk about mobile gaming and the fusion that we're already starting to hear about in the last discussion. Some of the other traditional sports innovations, cause marketing, which is incredibly important, influencer marketing, and then I'm going to round out by just talking a little bit about focus on return on investment, which is another kind of key trend that we're seeing at the moment. So just getting into this, let's start with virtual sport. So what I mean by virtual sport in this case is the multitude of different events which have been springing up over the last 18 months in the place of traditional sport. And most of these events have been events that have been organized on a streaming platform and look at the exponential growth that we've seen in streaming hours during the first months of the pandemic in 2020, and which have been sustained through this period. And these have been, many of these events have been incredibly successful in their own right. So I kind of originally come from the UK. We have a famous horse race every year called the Grand National in the UK. The virtual Grand National event that happened in 2020 actually got one of the largest audiences ever for that particular event. So these are not some kind of shadow of the other events. They're becoming events in their own right, and our prediction going forward is that these events will stay with us as we go back to whatever the new normal will look like. So that's one. And then on traditional sport innovation, we're already starting to hear about NFTs in the last panel, and I'm sure that we'll hear many more, and we've got many projects which are going on in relation to that as well. But I just want to pick on a couple of other things which are super interesting. So the first one is the number of major leagues around the world that are now launching their own Twitch channel, bringing together the Twitch audience, which is quite different from the traditional, certainly the traditional TV audience for sport. I think that's extremely significant. And the other one that I'd point to, and goes in the same direction in the fusion of the games industry and the sports industry, is looking at how we're getting a new set of developers that are looking at embedding sports content into games. And if you're not sure what I'm talking about here, one good thing to check out afterwards is the Aura platform from Australia, which again is it's a native to the games industry, games platform that is embedding sports content in there to give a much richer immersion, sort of immersion experience from that point of view. So traditional sport innovation is alive and well. Social causes and influences are also becoming critical to valuations in the sport economy at the moment. First of all, influencer marketing. So influencer marketing is the fastest growing vertical that we have at the moment within the Nielsen company. Particularly in this region, influencer marketing is becoming really, really important. Over the last few decades, this has been largely focused on the beauty industry and the fashion industry, but during the pandemic, that's really been broadening out across many, many other industries as well. And if we think about both athletes, but also in the case of esports, streamers that are associated with the esports scene, these are people that have an incredible platform, both from a influencer marketing point of view, but also a right to speak about social causes. Sports is at its core is a very value-based entity, and therefore creates an opportunity for brands, as long as they can do it in a credible way, to get involved in those causes as well. And that is driving significant changes in valuation in the industry from a sponsorship point of view. Final thing then, I said that I'm going to talk about, and I'll finish with now, is just how we focus on understanding return on investment in the sport and sponsorship industry. And this is something which, again, is really, really changing. So at Nielsen, we are the largest marketing econometrics organization on the planet. We, for many, many years, have been working with thousands of different brands on helping them get to a really granular understanding of the return on investment for sort of more general advertising. And what we've been seeing over the last 2 years is that same rigor now being applied to sponsorship in particular. And that might feel a little bit daunting, but actually it's hugely beneficial. And the reason for that is that when we look at those projects and when we look at sponsorship in sport and in e-sport and compare that to traditional advertising, of course there's a lot of variability in the return on investment that comes through. But broadly speaking, it stacks up very, very well. And it stacks up very well in particular if we look at the long-term return on investment associated with sponsorship, which we can do now at Nielsen. And that's crucial because in the modeling that we do, we can see that the return on investment in year 3 of a sponsorship is typically 3 to 5 times the size of the financial return on investment in the first year. So getting that kind of broader holistic look and being able to predict that is absolutely crucial. But the most important thing about this is that by getting that really granular and robust understanding of the return of investment, that means that these investments are inherently less risky for the brands that are involved in sponsorship. And therefore, it becomes easier to invest again, despite all of the uncertainty that we've all been through over the last 18 months. So that's basically all I have for today. I guess the summary is apocalyptic levels of change, but a massive amount of opportunity for us in the industry if we can pivot towards these key growth driver areas. Thank you very much.